He's a son of an Assemblies of God pastor. He, at about 20 years old, found himself on the mission field in Yemen with a friend of ours. Faze is the mission elder at Qasr el-Dabar Church, and so they shared a tent for a number of while. Small world, if you will. But, and then Carl tells me, and I already shared with Garrett, that he lives in the neighborhood almost across from Cherry Hills Church in the Denver area. So he's close to being a Presbyterian, and I'm hoping by the time he leaves tomorrow that he'll be one of us.
Yes.
Carl, come on. I'm not going to say much more, but it's a brother who loves the Lord. And get ready. He's going to take us on a ride. And don't get offended if he tells you he's used to be a Christian. Okay? I'm going to leave it at that.
Wow, what a setup. You used to be a Christian, and I'm almost a Presbyterian. So let's see, what does that mean? I'm not sure. You know, it wasn't just too many years ago that I walked up some steps, actually 3 steps, onto a stage a little bigger than this in Lebanon, South Lebanon, and behind me was I was in a mosque, not a church. Behind me was a full-wall mural of the Ayatollah Khomeini from Iran. And it was a Shiite Hezbollah mosque in South Lebanon. They'd asked me to come and preach, as you know, as one does. And so I walked up to, yeah, it's okay if you laugh. By the way, if I say something that I think is funny, then you're still supposed to laugh, even if it's actually not funny. I don't know if you know that rule or not with guest speakers. But so I walked up on the stage, and just before, I stood up on the last one, and the imam of the mosque, so like Garrett is a pastor, and imam is the pastor of a mosque, the head guy of the mosque, kind of runs up behind me, and he was maybe the guy, the picture you have in your head of a Muslim leader, he was actually that guy. Had a black turban, had a big bushy beard, was kind of big, and had a long black robe. And he ran up behind me right as I'm walking up the stairs. They've invited me to come and speak, and he kind of tapped my shoulder and said, Mr. Carl. I don't really have a title, so everybody there calls me Mr. Carl. And so I said, yes. And we're speaking in Arabic, but I'm assuming you don't know Arabic, so I'm saying it in English. So he said, one thing. And I just thought, oh no, he's changed his mind, which kind of makes sense. What are you doing having a Christian speaker, preacher guy talk about, God or whatever in your mosque? He's changed his mind, even though he was the one that invited me. I just thought he got nervous because the mosque was probably actually almost the size of this gymnasium, and it was packed, just absolutely jammed. And I said, Mr. Carl, one thing. And he got, I don't know if you know, have you noticed, if you travel at all, that personal space in other parts of the world isn't proper? Like our personal space is like this, and so he's like right here. Mr. Carl, one thing. I said, yes. He said, please do not speak about Christianity, just Jesus. And I said, okay. All right. So I got up, and I'm thinking, I think that's good. Is that good? I think that's okay. I don't know what he means by don't speak. Actually, I do know what he means now, and we'll unpack that a little bit. But at the time, I'm not sure I knew what he meant by that. And actually, I still can't be sure if I know what he meant by don't speak about Christianity, just Jesus. But I walked on up, and I can remember, I remember as if it were yesterday, literally walking the last 5 steps to the big podium that was like this, just a lot bigger, and thinking, just Jesus. Okay, I was going to speak about Jesus anyway, because that's what I do, and that's what the book that we preach from is about, from beginning to end. So I think that should be fine. But for some reason, the way he said it, it was so intent, and his eyes were he looked like an Old Testament prophet. He was like piercing my eyes, and just Jesus. And I'm thinking, this all happens in 5 steps. I'm thinking about all that and thinking, can God speak through a Muslim imam to a Christian preacher? I think the answer is still yes to that. I mean, God can use anybody to do whatever he wants, right? So Jesus. Okay, Jesus. So I kind of carried on with what I'd already prepared, which thankfully was actually about Jesus. I've tried preaching other things, and it just doesn't go that well. And so I was speaking about Jesus, but I kept thinking I got to stick just on Jesus. Now, in hindsight, I know some of what he meant we wouldn't agree with. Like he would be saying, don't preach Paul. Right? We actually, by the way, depends on how you mean that, we agree with that too. We actually also don't preach Paul. And Paul didn't preach Paul. Who did Paul preach? Starts with a J. Good. Yeah, by the way, that's always the answer today. So I mean, it should always be the answer anyway. But for sure today, the answer is not even Christ, not even Lord. Those are titles, not names. His name is Jesus. So I think he meant don't preach the Old Testament, which we wouldn't agree. Don't preach the Pauline letters, which we wouldn't agree. Don't preach the Bible. Don't preach American stuff. I think that's kind of what, people in the Middle East, I don't know if you'd guess it or not, are a little bit sensitive to the American issue. Kind of like we're sensitive to the Middle East issue. Have you noticed? It always kind of works both ways. And so they're a little sensitive to feeling like Christianity comes from America, which I have to remind them that Jesus actually wasn't from Baton Rouge. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but he's not American. He wasn't white. He wasn't Republican. Am I done yet, or? And he wasn't Democrat. I mean, he wasn't one of us. He was actually a short, brown-skinned Middle Eastern guy. And so I think we forget that. So anyway, I get up there and I start talking about Jesus as I was doing, and they'd given me 45 minutes to talk, which is pretty good. That's about what I have this morning. And then at the end of the 45 minutes, I think the imam was sitting right there where you are. You could sense that I was winding down, I think because I said, I'm finished, or something like that. And so he went like this. And I said, I went, excuse me? I said, keep going. At the end of 40, now, churches never do that to me. They're always like, I think I think time's up. But he said, keep going. And I'm being really honest, my initial gut reaction, just my initial feeling was, oh no. I've said 45-minute stuff of just focused on Jesus. I think I'm almost done. And so I had told the parable of the prodigal son, which is, of course, a great story that Jesus told. And so I sort of retold it again. I gave some other angles, and he kept doing this. I mean, I did it for another half hour. At the end of the half hour, he did this again, and the feeling of panic was increasing inside of me every time, thinking, here I am, the Jesus guy, the missionary to Muslims guy, and I might have run out of stuff on Jesus. I mean, that's really not good after about an hour and a half or so. So that set me on this lifelong journey. And Paul says it well, I think, in 1 Corinthians to the Corinthians in chapter 2, verse 2. One of my favorite passages, 1 Corinthians 2, verses 1 through 5. But right there in the middle, it says, when I was with you, brothers, I decided to know nothing. Now, it doesn't say Paul knew nothing. Paul knew a lot. I mean, he was probably the greatest theologian of all time. He was a perfect Pharisee. He was a perfect from the right tribe, trained under the right teacher. He has this great line in his CV, his resume, in Philippians chapter 3, where Paul says, actually in regards to all things that we all know till now, which is called the law, in regards to all of that stuff, I'm faultless. That's pretty gutsy. So he was like the perfect Jewish religious leader of that time. He had just missed, up until that point, one thing. And so it wasn't that Paul didn't know anything. He said, I've decided to know nothing except for Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Back to 1 Corinthians 2:2. You got to get that right. It wasn't that he knew nothing. He has decided. He also says it in that passage in Philippians 3. All this stuff, all this good stuff that I knew, all this good theology, all the law that I knew is like dung compared to knowing Jesus Christ. So Paul's constantly setting up this comparison between good stuff, the law, I would say religion, religiosity, being a religious leader over here, which isn't bad. It's just not quite the right thing. It's not the best thing, and that's Jesus. So at the end of the time, after he'd done this several times, and I finally kind of ran out, and I think he was getting tired. Maybe it was 2.5 hours in. We finished, and I felt sick. I mean, the only good thing that came out of that is they invited me back, so I don't know why. But I ended up doing a mosque preaching tour in South Lebanon. You probably didn't see that on the news, but it happened, and happens till now. In fact, I was asked just soon after that, I was asked to go down and speak in Cairo. But instead, I've spoken at Casa de Barra before, where Pastor Medearis and Pastor Sami are pastoring, and you guys have a relationship with. But I more go on the Muslim side of things, so I was asked to speak at the largest Islamic seminary in the world. It's called Al-Azhar. It's in Cairo. Around the world, Al-Azhar has 450,000 students, and they asked me to come and speak to their translation department. And I say yes to kind of whatever. I mean, I speak to Presbyterians, Muslims, whatever, you know, I mean, that's just kind of Christians even. And so I said yes. I don't know what the translation department is, but I get there, and it's the missions department. It's the missions department of the seminary of Al-Azhar Mosque. So they're translating Islam into Westernese, and they're kind of sending Muslim missionaries to the West. And so I'm the speaker, and there are about 1,000 people there. And they'd asked me to come and speak about Christianity. And so we're just getting ready to talk, and again, the imam of that seminary, the local scholar, comes up and talks to me and kind of wants to debrief my talk. And I said, there's only one thing. I don't feel all that comfortable talking about Christianity. Do you mind if I talk about something else? And he said, well, it depends what the something else is. And I said, would it be okay if I just talked about Jesus? And he goes, well, yeah, whatever, Christianity, Jesus, I mean, it's kind of the same. And I said, well, no, it's not the same at all. Actually, Jesus didn't start a religion called Christianity, and Jesus wasn't even a Christian. I mean, do you guys know that as well? I'm shocking you. He wasn't from Louisiana. He wasn't white. Now he's not a Christian. What religion was Jesus? He was Jewish. There were no Christians in the time of Jesus. He wasn't a Christian. He was Jewish. And so I'm trying to help him understand that there's a difference between what he sees as Christendom, Christianity, and this wonderful, beautiful, amazing person, Jesus Christ. And so I said, do you mind if I just talk about Jesus? And he's like, yeah, whatever. So anyway, I get up, and I give this little talk. It's called We've Hijacked Jesus. So it's a little slightly provocative in a Muslim mosque seminary, and that we Westerners, we being us white kind of Western evangelical, we've taken Jesus, this Middle Eastern Jesus, and we've repackaged him in a white Western kind of, and then we reintroduce him as missionaries back to the Muslim world where he actually came from. We came from that part of the world, not here. And then they don't recognize him, and then they get offended, and then we're offended, they're offended, and then we have a problem. And I said, and I think it's time for you to take Jesus back. I don't own him. My people don't own him. He's not mine. He came for the whole world. You should take him back. When I said that, not expecting any of this, a guy in the back jumped up, and he said, yes, take Jesus back. And then just like that, the whole crowd starts chanting, take Jesus back. And I'm thinking, what have I done? This is weird. And so that was it. And they had this long, they chanted for 5 minutes. And I think, is that good or bad? Do we want Muslims? So do we actually want Muslims to have Jesus? Yes. It wasn't like a resounding yes there, but yes. Mostly. Do we? So I have two assumptions this morning, and I'll have them tomorrow as well. Two assumptions. Assumption number one is God created and equally loves everybody. Do we agree with that? That's a safe assumption, right? God created everybody, and he loves equally everybody. So even those of us that are in his family, in his kingdom, he loves the same as a member of ISIS. I'm just trying to make it really specific. Do you agree with that? For sure. Anybody disagree with that? I'm not talking about what we're doing or how you're acting or anything like that, but just as a foundation, he created the worst member of ISIS. He knew him in his mother's womb. He formed him. He created him. Right? I know it's kind of hard when I make it specific. And he, right now, loves him. Correct? So I think, my guess is this is an agreeing audience with this kind of thing. Now, I don't know that every Christian in the world would necessarily agree with that, but I think you kind of, if you think about it a little bit, you almost have to, don't you? You can't really say, no, God doesn't love them. Now, I think very quickly we like to jump to, yeah, but God doesn't love what they're doing. Yes, we agree God doesn't love what they're doing, but just don't jump so quickly to that. Just rest for a little while on God created them, and he loves them right now, right where they are. And then a long pause, and then we could say, and maybe God doesn't like what they're doing. And by the way, God doesn't always like what we're doing as well, right? Is that fair? Right. So that's kind of assumption number one. That's pretty safe. Assumption number two, which is maybe a little more controversial, but shouldn't be, I don't think, is I actually believe John 4 is good for all time. So Jesus has this interesting, as he always does, dialogue with the disciples. He gets asked a question, then Jesus asks another question. They ask him a question, then he doesn't answer the question, then he tells a random story that nobody understands, and he walks away. That's kind of what Jesus does with people. So one of those times, they're asking him a question, and then he says, I know you do say 4 months more than the harvest, but don't say. I mean, he's probably talking in April. My guess it was in the springtime. In 4 months more, there would have been a harvest. I mean, Jesus was very connected to the actual earth, to the land. He wasn't a disembodied spirit, hovering around. He was a person, a full man that walked in an actual time and place. The Romans called it Palestine. It was the ancient land of Israel, and now again the current land of Israel and Palestine, actually. We'll get into that later, maybe, or maybe not. But Jesus was connected to earth, and there were farmers around. So lots of his analogies, his metaphors, his stories relate to farming. And if you're a farmer, then you understand them. If you're a city boy or city slicker, you don't really understand them. But they were connected. So he says, no, don't. I know you say 4 months more, but don't say 4 months more. Actually, look around and open your eyes. Look and see. Again, something that Jesus says a lot. And if you have eyes to see, you'll see. If you have ears to hear, you will hear. But if you don't have eyes or ears, you won't see and you won't hear. But open your ears, open your eyes, and look. The harvest is ripe. And there's only one problem with the harvest being picked, because it's ripe. What happens when there's a ripe harvest? You just go out and you pick it. The fruit trees, we had grapefruit and oranges this morning. You don't have to have a committee sitting around the grapefruit tree, planning for the grapefruit to be ripe. You just kind of look, and you might pull it a little bit, and if it comes off kind of easily, and it's a little bit, it's kind of soft, you go, oh, it's ripe. So what do you need? You need pickers. You just need somebody to go out there and, pick it. You don't have to pray for it to be ripe. There's actually no place in the Bible that says to pray for the harvest to be ripe. The harvest is ripe. Jesus didn't seem to qualify that. I actually can't find a place. This is the controversial part, just, making sure you don't miss it. I'm not sure there's any hint that the harvest might not ever be ripe anywhere. It's funny how in America we think that a hard harvest field is the Muslim world, right? I mean, generally. I mean, do you hear that a lot of times that we think Muslims are kind of difficult? That was never our experience. Muslims are both the nicest people in the world. They cook the best food, as you can see. I used to be skinny. We had, actually, what was the restaurant? We had great Lebanese Palestinian food, Zaruna. There's a great Lebanese Mediterranean Palestinian food right here. What's the? It's on Sigan. Sigan? That's Shigan. Sigan. Yeah, that street. And it's kind of back off. It's called Zaruna. It's fantastic food. We ate there last night. Fantastic food. The owners are Palestinian. They were kind of embarrassed to say they were Palestinian because of politics. He first said Jordan. I said, really, what part of Jordan? He goes, well, I'm a Palestinian Jordanian. I said, what part of Palestine? And then he lit up. He's like, oh, there's a place called Palestine? Yes, I've been there many times. What part of Palestine? And he said, well, it's up in the north. I said, like near Nablus? Yes, right next to Nablus. Oh, my goodness, how'd you know that? I said, I've been there. So, it's really fun to do that. So the harvest is ripe everywhere. We think the harvest is difficult there. We lived in Beirut for 12 years. From 92 to 2004, but I've been going in and out of the Middle East for 32 years. First, like you said, was in Yemen in a tent with Fayez, the missions pastor at this Casa de Barra church in Cairo, and been going in and out since then. We're getting ready to move back to the Middle East this fall. Actually, I leave from here Sunday, tomorrow night, to D.C. I'll be in D.C. for a week for an event up there, and then go on to Dubai. My wife and I will be in Dubai for 5 weeks, and we're planning on moving back to the Middle East in October. So our whole life has been involved in the Middle East. When we lived in Beirut, we saw lots and lots of Muslims come to Jesus. Lots of Muslims started following Jesus, like hundreds, maybe thousands. I mean, probably thousands. We didn't make a tally, but in my head, I sort of have a general idea, and you don't always know. And somebody says yes, but then not really. And then right, people that say they did, but obviously aren't. And there are people that say they aren't, but then they look like they are. And then you don't always know. But a lot of people. I remember in Beirut, our missionary friends in Damascus, Syria, always said to us, Carl, you guys are doing that in Lebanon, but you should come to Damascus. Lebanon's easy, but Syria is difficult. And, I was younger and even cockier than I am now, so I'm like, my first thought is if somebody says you can't do that in Damascus, of course, what do I want to do? I want to go to Damascus and do whatever we were doing. We weren't doing anything. We were just like living our lives and talking about Jesus. So we just went there for a month. We moved our whole We moved our family actually to Damascus, and a bunch of our team members followed us. Not everybody, but some followed us. And we went to Damascus and just, we didn't like grab a bullhorn and start preaching on the streets. That might not work so well, but we just talked to everybody, all the fruit shop owners and the restaurant people and where we bought our clothes and our neighbors. Talk to them about Jesus. And why would you do that? Because you love Jesus. And you always talk about what you love. So we've already found out, Rich and I found out we both love duck hunting. So we talk about duck hunting. We like food. We talked about food. You always talk about, we like football. We talked about college football already this morning. I'm a Nebraska fan. He's Miami or whatever, some other team. Some bad boy team in the South fan. I don't know even why you would do that. I don't know how you can be Presbyterian or a Christian and be a Miami Hurricanes, but whatever. I'm just saying. So, right, very quickly, you kind of find out quickly what you love, don't you? Because what is in your heart comes out of your mouth. It's actually like the law of gravity. You drop a pin, it always goes down. If Jesus is in there and he's consumed you, he will come out. He actually says that out of the abundance of your heart, your mouth will speak. You don't have to try to get it to speak. I don't have anybody say to me on the flight out here. I sit next to a guy, and I just happen to have bought in the airport a Field and Stream magazine. Because when I'm on airplanes, I feel sorry for myself, so I always indulge in something that I wouldn't otherwise buy. So I always buy a sports, usually a hunting or fishing magazine. So I bought Field and Stream. I sat down, opened it up. The guy next to me starts talking to me we talked the whole way about hunting and fishing. I actually felt guilty. I thought I never mentioned Jesus. The whole 2.5-hour flight, we talked about hunting and fishing for 2.5 hours. I must love hunting and fishing more than I love Jesus. And I think that's just kind of the way it is. Whatever's in there comes out. So we went to Damascus, and in 1 month, we saw a whole bunch of Syrian Muslims start to follow Jesus. It was funny, when we moved from Beirut back to Colorado, we ended up in this little place called Highlands Ranch, we actually bought a house literally right next to this big EPC church called Cherry Hills Community Church. And people started saying, other than Cherry Hills, which has figured out how to do it the right way, Highlands Ranch is really difficult. I know Beirut was, you had lots of fruit over there. Now all of a sudden it's reversed. We have lots of fruit in the Middle East, but back here it's difficult. And I've actually seen that to be true through my life, that people want to think that wherever they are is uniquely difficult. I've had people in the Bible Belt and in the South say, well, it's kind of like a reverse difficulty here because everybody here is a Christian, and so it's really difficult because they think they're all Christians, so actually preaching about actual Jesus is difficult because they're all... Why do we do that? Are we trying to justify that we don't see growth? Are we trying to justify that our neighbors that we've lived next to for 30 years still don't know Jesus? Or why do we do... I don't know why we do that. I'm just saying Jesus said the harvest is ripe. I would just say we should take it seriously. My assumption is the harvest is ripe. If the harvest happens to not be ripe with somebody you're talking to, you should be surprised. You'd think, that's weird. I just talked about Jesus, how wonderful he is, how amazing he is, and that person doesn't seem to like Jesus. That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Because if you go on with the other assumption, well, especially with Muslims, you know how they are. I watch Fox News. I can see exactly how they are, and they're going to be difficult. Did I just say Fox News out loud? I did. Oh, okay. I'm not supposed to do that. I watched CNN, and they were I'll try to offend everybody equally, okay? Don't worry. We just kind of know, and you kind of do this. They might not all be, I know they're not all terrorists. By the way, one of the most prejudiced things you can say about a people group is they're not all that. They're not all that. What a horrible thing to say about 1.7 billion people. What do you mean they're not all terrorists? Of course they're not all terrorists. Actually, I don't know any there are. I've never met one. I've never been killed by a Muslim, as you can see. I'm still very much alive. I've been doing this for 32 years. So don't say they're not all terrorists. I'm sure some of them are good. Well, don't say that. I'd say the percentages of Muslims who are good people are exactly the same as the percentages of Christians who are good people. Have you ever met any Christians who actually turn out to be bad people? Why is the joke among Christian businessmen to not do business with other Christians? Why do we all know that joke? Because we've all done it. We've all gotten ripped off, right? So we've got lots of bad apples in our midst, just like they do. I think it's about equal. So the harvest is ripe. You have to assume that. Please assume that. The harvest is ripe in the Muslim world, and it's ripe in Baton Rouge, and it's ripe in Denver, Colorado. It's ripe in Seattle. I was just speaking at a church in Seattle that's having like a little miniature revival in Seattle, the most liberal city in America. Jesus isn't confused by Seattle or Boston. He doesn't think, oh gosh, the Northeast and northwest corners of America are really difficult for me. I don't know what I'm going to do because they're liberal. Do you think Jesus has a strategy to reach liberals? Yes. He also has one to reach conservatives as well, and they might be equally difficult. So I was fishing. I like to fly fish as well, so back to the fishing and hunting thing. See, it keeps going around. I actually taught my daughter, starting to teach my daughter how to fly fish in the South Platte River just Thursday, the day before I flew out here. It didn't go very well, but anyway, I was fly fishing with a friend in a mountain. He has a little ranch over by Aspen, Colorado, and so I went over to his house, spent the weekend with him, and we're fishing. It's kind of cheating fishing, like he has ponds, so every fish is like at least 5 pounds. He has the rainbow and brown trout, and so after about 3 hours, literally my arm was getting tired. It wasn't even, seriously, it's kind of fun at first because it's just fun to catch a fish on a fly rod, especially a big fish, and then after a while, it's kind of like, okay, I can kind of go whack and slap the fly, and they still just go boom, so it's not even, there's nothing interesting about it. So we get kind of bored, and so he goes, hey, do you want to meet my neighbor? I said, sure. That's kind of weird, but I like to meet neighbors. Like, guess who's your neighbor? He said, it's Joe Cocker. I said, like the guy that can't sing, Joe Cocker? You are so beautiful to me. That guy, right? Joe Cocker, Woodstock, all that. Joe Cocker's his neighbor. He bought his ranch from Joe Cocker. And it turns out Joe Cocker's lived like 18 years in western Colorado, up in the mountains, just kind of about an hour west of Aspen, Colorado. I said, yeah, that sounds awesome. He goes, well, let me call him real quick. So he picks up his phone. We're out in the pond. Hey, Joe, this is Duffy. I have a friend here. I think he's kind of interesting guy. You might want to meet him. Do you have any time right now? And anyway, Joe was making a new, he's recently died, but this is 3 years ago. He was just making a new album, actually, and so his band was recording in the studio in their basement, and he goes, well, I'm kind of busy, but how about if I just say hi, maybe 5 minutes or something, just come by and say hi. So my friend Duffy says to me, do you want to go just say hi? I said, sure, that sounds fun. So we jump in his pickup. We're driving down like the mile gravel road around my friend Duffy's ranch to Joe Cocker's ranch, which is about 1,000 acres. And on the whole drive, my friend kind of gives me a lecture. He says, now listen, I've known Joe Cocker for 17 years. I bought my ranch from him. I've talked to him a lot. I've witnessed to him a lot, and he doesn't want anything to do with Christianity. So just, kind of to honor my friendship with him, he's kind of a big deal around here, and everybody wants to meet him, and so I feel sensitive introducing him to somebody. I usually don't do that. So just don't talk to him about Christianity. And I go, Duffy, you know me. I would never talk about Christianity. And he goes, yeah, whatever. Don't play that. It's Jesus, not Christianity again with me. Don't talk about Christianity or about Jesus or anything like that. And I go, okay, I don't know. I've never tried to not talk about Jesus, but I could try, And I kind of get that. I know a few people that are kind of important, and it's always awkward when you don't want your friend to awkwardly try to evangelize your friend, right? So you want to protect the relationship. So I get that. So I said, and he goes, Carl, promise me, do not talk about Christianity, Bible, God, Jesus. He tried to cover every word that I might try to sneak around. I go, well, that's the weirdest thing I've ever promised, but okay, I'll try. So we get there, and Joe's mixing this green juice thing in this blender, and he first tells me, he's been dry for 8 years, and he didn't look great. He looked like an old English rocker would look, like he's done a few too many of everything. But he's cleaned up his life, and he's trying to be good. And so, hi, Carl, Joe. They hug each other. And so Joe's blending, and he stops blending, looks at me, and he goes, so what do you do? And I looked at Duffy, and Duffy went like this. And so I'm thinking, how do I say what I do without saying the word Jesus? This is really weird. I said, well, I do peacemaking in the Middle East, which is true. Actually, we do. We bring together different sides, and I actually even take members of Congress to the Middle East. And so we do some kind of, it's not really politics, but it's kind of behind-the-scenes politicking that always gets very quickly to Jesus. We bring Palestinians and Israelis together, and it's obviously not working very well, but that is part of what I do. So I said that. I said, I do peacemaking in the Middle East. He goes, really? How do you do that? And I looked at Duffy, and Duffy was like, and so I said, how do I do that without saying Jesus? I said, well, we bring two opposing sides together. It could be Shiites and Sunnis or Israelis and Palestinians, and we sit down together and we talk about some common teachings. And then, of course, he said, and what are those teachings? I mean, he was like, he's on it. Like, seriously, he was on it. He wasn't letting me get out. He's like, what are those teachings? I looked at Duffy, and he goes, and so I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Okay. It was like killing me. I go, it's actually the Sermon on the Mount. And that is what we use. We actually use Matthew 5, 6, and 7 as a platform for the thing that brings anybody and everybody together. If you don't think that works, that's just because you might not have tried it, because I'm going to tell you even how it worked then. So I said, Sermon on the Mount, the teachings of Jesus. And he goes, holy blank. And I said, well, yeah, I never thought of it that way, but yes, I mean, yeah, that's what we do. We use the teachings of Jesus. He goes, oh. He goes, what's that called? The Sermon on the what again? A Sermon on the Mount, the mountainside. He was like sitting on the side of a mountain above the Sea of Galilee, and he gathered his, followers together, and then a bunch of other people came and followed him up there too, and he taught the whole crowd. He started by saying the Beatitudes, that's where it starts. And I said, that's where you find the do not judge. That's where you find a couple little cool stories about salt and light, and about, if you have any needs, that God will take care of you, and like lilies of the field and birds of the air. I mean, there's all this famous stuff in there. I'm telling him this. All this famous stuff, it's all packed right in those 3 little chapters. He goes, wow. Well, come inside. Let's sit down. And so about 2 hours later, after our 5 minutes, he goes, why don't we should just read this. How long does it take to read that? And I said, well, it takes 22 minutes. And he goes, wow. It's like you could tell he's thinking, and his band members keep coming up the stairs and going, Joe, what are you doing up here? We're recording down there. And he's like, I'll come down a little bit. And then anyway, he yells to his maid. He goes, hey, I can't remember her name. Do we have one of those Bibles in the house somewhere? She goes, yes, sir. She's English as well. Yes, sir, we have one in the basement. And so anyway, she disappears, and she comes back up with this huge, the family Bible things, this huge family Bible, and she was literally, I'm not making this up, she's blowing on it, blowing the dust off, going, and she, boom, plops it down right in front of us. And he's like, well, he turns around to me. He's like, well, let's find that. So I opened it up, find Matthew chapter 5. He goes, let's read it. So I said, why don't you read it? So we actually ended up taking turns. Actually, I read chapter 5, he read chapter 6, and Duffy read chapter 7. And it probably took us 25 minutes. If I just read it kind of straight through, it takes me 22 minutes. And we've done that now hundreds of times with people. And by the way, that is what we do with Israeli and Palestinian political leaders who have never met each other, who want to kill each other. We read the Sermon on the Mount straight through, without pause, without explanation. By the way, there's about 1,000 things in there that are crazily controversial, like unbelievable stuff. You've heard it said this, but I tell you this. Like, that stuff is just crazy. I mean, who would say that kind of stuff? I don't know if you've read the Sermon on the Mount through fresh eyes recently or not, but you should read it and try to pretend as best you can that you've never read it before, like it's the first time you've ever read it. And just kind of take it literally. I mean, don't worry about the speck in your brother's eye. Just take the log. Think of an actual log. Think of having a log in your eye. Kunk. And then think of your brother having a speck in his eye and you trying to help him get the speck out of his eye when you have a log stuck in, or maybe it's stuck this way. I don't know if it's this way or if it's this way, but you have a log in your eye and you're going like this, trying to get the speck out of your, and the guy's like, no, stop it, you're going to make me blind. I mean, think about it literally, think about it practically. Let it hit you. And Joe, we would read, and he would literally, he would actually grunt. Ooh, oh, ah. I mean, you should have said, I wish I had videotaped this talk. At the end of the time, the guys were just like, they were all, actually this whole band was standing up there going, what the blankety blank is going on? I mean, they were just like all freaked out. There were lots of cussing going on. And I mean, they're English and they're rock stars. I mean, it's okay. And it's like, there's like a little out clause. If you're an English rock star, you can say bad words. And so at the end of the time, they're finally like, Joe, we got to go. And he's like, oh my goodness, I got to go. But this is so interesting. So we stand up to leave. He turns to my friend Duffy. Remember on the way down, remember Duffy's little speech to me? He turns to Duffy and he said, why the blank have you never told me this? See, that's the power of Jesus versus the stuff of Christendom. I have to be careful, don't I? Because some of the stuff of Christendom is our history. Some of the bad stuff, awkward little periods like the Crusades and the Inquisition and burning people at the stake and things like that. These are our cousins. We'll call them our awkward cousins. And so I don't even know that we have to disassociate ourselves from them. But it's just not, there's just no power there. There's actual power in the name of Jesus. And we know that because we're fans, we're friends, we're lovers of, hopefully, even Jesus. But we easily forget and we go back to preaching Christianity and sometimes defending Christianity. Just a couple more thoughts and a couple more stories. And I just want to say that I think what we're going to do a lot of after our steak lunch is we'll be doing just some Q&A. So if you have some cues, I can either make up answers or I can ask you a better question back, which is what I'm more likely to do. So if you have questions, we'll try and do more of that afterwards. But so we have this idea, these two assumptions, that God created and loves everybody. We don't disagree with that, and that the harvest is ripe. I don't know if you disagree with that, but since I'm speaking, you can't disagree right now. You can talk to me later. But I think that kind of feels right, doesn't it? That the harvest actually might be ripe. But then what about a place like Saudi Arabia? That's the big. Actually, a lot of times missionaries don't even say the word Saudi Arabia. They say, I visit a place. It's in the Middle East. I always go, Saudi Arabia? No, you're not supposed to say that. Why don't you say that? It's a country. It's like on the map, and our president was just there. And I think we know about it. Well, yeah, but we're sneaking. We have to be sneaky. Why are we being sneaky? Well, because they don't like Christians there. See, this is complicated, isn't it? They actually don't like Christians there, because what's a Christian? A Christian is an adherent to the religion of Christianity. And what's Christianity? Let's just think about this. Let's do this for a little bit. Like if I say to you these days, Muslim, and we did word association, probably the first 2 or 3 words that come to your mind are actually probably negative, if we were honest, unfortunately, but that's just the reality. If your name is Ali, and you're from southern Iraq, if your name is Ali from southern Iraq, you're a Shiite Muslim. If you said to Ali, let's say Ali's never left Iraq, and if you go to Ali and you're down in Basra, and you say, Ali, tell me, what are 3 or 4 things that come to your mind, Ali, when I say Christianity? And you be positive about it. When I say Christianity. See, Christianity. Christianity. What do you think about Christianity? What do you think Ali's, let's actually do this. What do you think 2, 3, 4, 5 things that Ali would say when he thinks of Christianity? Real question. Crusades, that's good. That's probably number 1. Unfortunately, and we kind of go, Crusades, geez, get over it, people. That was like 1,000 years ago. Those aren't even, they're crazy. And by the way, they were Catholics anyway, so they're not even our tribe. We have nothing to do with those guys. And they're French, and they're French Catholics, and Germans. We don't like this. So yeah, Crusades, what else? Materialism, infidel, materialism. Actually, they wouldn't say infidel. We would think that they would, but actually, I would never think of a Muslim saying infidel. But they could eventually. That might be in the top 10. But somebody said materialism. What else? Wow. Now, that's a deep thought. Because one of the questions I will get, maybe not now because I'm going to answer it now, is, well, what about how they treat their women? And I would say, and what about how we treat our women? Who treats their women worse, would you say? Muslims who cover them or Christians who uncover them? They're not Christians doing that. Well, if we're going to call them all Muslims, we have to call ourselves all Christians, right? Again, we're trying to do apples and apples. We're not cheating. We're not doing apples to oranges. We're doing apples to apples. So if all Muslims cover the women and make them cover, then all Christians, because America, in their mind, is a Christian nation. Where does pornography come from? The biggest sin in the world. Killing more people times 1,000,000 than ISIS has ever done. It comes from here, from Christian America. We uncover our women, which is more disgraceful. They might not both be good. I'm not defending making your women cover. I'm just saying, make sure we recognize that we have logs in our eyes before we help our Muslim brothers and friends take the specks out of their eyes. They have specks in their eyes. My wife's been to Saudi Arabia. Do you think, Chris, my wife, likes Saudi Arabia? She has to wear the burqa. I joke and say, oh, you're so cute in that. She slaps me. She's like, yeah, I'll show you cute, you can't see them. Now, it's interesting when you ask lots of Muslim women, not so much the burqa, this thing, but the abaya, they actually like. Why do you like the abaya? Because you can wear your pajamas all day. Seriously, and they do. They walk out the door, they throw on the abaya, and they go shopping, and nobody knows what they have on underneath of there. And then if they're at the party at night with all women, and some of the most elaborate parties in the world are in Saudi Arabia because they have money, they take it off and they're dressed in Parisian, fancy clothes and miniskirts and high heels. They look like anybody that would look, like a fancy, well-dressed French lady, honestly. So, yeah, it's so hard to see the log in our eyes. What else would they see? So how we treat women here, what else might they say? Polytheism. Yeah, they actually, do you know that Muslims think that we believe in 3 gods? Just real quick, see how good your preaching's been here. How many gods do you all believe in? Are you sure? Not 3. Does anybody here believe in 3 gods? Because they're sure that we believe in 3 gods. Why do they think that? It's because we have this word called trinity. What does tri mean? I think it means 3. And in Arabic, al-thulutha means the 3. So here's a typical conversation between a Muslim and a Christian missionary. A Muslim says, stuck for Allah, means God curse you, you heretic, you believe in 3 gods. And they'll say, you believe in the al-thulutha, you believe in the Trinity. Christian missionary, thinking he's defending the truth, says, absolutely I do. What he's saying to the Muslim is, absolutely I believe in 3 gods. No, stop saying that. They are monotheist. We can talk later about whether their God is the same God as our God if you want to. My guess is somebody would like to know about that, and I could give you my version of the answer if you want. But they believe in one God. Let's say that's fair, right? Jews believe in one God. Jews don't believe God had a son named Jesus either. I haven't heard too many people say Jews believe in a different God than we do. Could just be prejudice. Muslims believe in a different one. Muslims are actually closer to what we believe about Jesus than Jews are by maybe 10. Do you know that? If you ask any Jew 10 questions about Jesus, they'd be 0 for 10 on the answers. If you ask any Muslim 10 questions, they're actually about 6 out of 10 correct. They're missing a few key things like the deity of Jesus and the crucifixion. So I'm not saying it's all the same. Hear me carefully. I'm not saying it's all the same. It's not all the same. Obviously, I've given my life to share with them the rest of the story. But they're fairly close. So, materialism, what else have you not said that I want you to say? Pornography, gang warfare. Like, why do you have gangs? I was in Saudi Arabia. I was just there last month in Saudi Arabia, and I was there 2 years ago. Remember in our city, Denver, Colorado, about 2 summers ago in Aurora, Colorado, there was this guy that went into the midnight showing at the Theater of the Dark Night, I think it was, and killed 12 people. Remember that? I was in Saudi Arabia when that happened. So Chris, my wife, was back home. One of our kids was still home then. And the next morning, I got up to the news, and all my Saudi friends were at this big house with lots of Saudis, and they all came up to me and said, Carl, you're from Colorado, right? And I said, yeah. And are you from Denver? Yeah. Are you from Aurora? They don't know how to say it, but Aurora? No, I'm not from Aurora, but did you hear what happened? No, what happened? And they told me the news about this guy. I said, well, Aurora's far from our house, and I can't imagine my wife going to the midnight showing of The Dark Knight or ever going to that movie anyway. And so, I'm sure I didn't hear anything, so I'm sure we're fine, but get this. Now listen carefully. Remember the log in our eye thing when I'm telling you this little thing here? Log in eye. We're trying to get the logs out of our eye. The Saudi host of this house I'm staying at, he's probably worth $5-10 billion. He's a really famous Saudi man. He says to me, and went like this, and he was so sorry. He kept hugging me and saying, are you sure you're okay? Are you sure? Do you want to, and he handed me my cell phone, his cell phone. Do you want to call your wife to make sure she's okay? And I said, no, sir, thank you. I'm sure she's fine. And I would have heard, no, I'm sure she's fine. Actually, I did end up calling her because he freaked me out so much. I thought, well, I better call her because, so I used his phone to call her. He's like, Carl, what is it about Americans that makes them want to just walk into schools and places like this and randomly kill people? And he wasn't trying to make a point because he's a good friend. He says, is it something in Christianity that causes them to do this? Does that sound like an argument you've ever heard, but from the other side? See, it's hard to walk in the other person's shoes. Hard to understand what they feel, what they're going through, what actually the story, their history. It's hard to do that because it's not our history. It's not our story. We have our own story. We feel hurt by Muslims, don't we? So we react to Muslims. Not just 9/11, that was the big hurt, but we have a fairly long history of feeling hurt by Muslims. And so when somebody says something positive about Muslims, you kind of immediately kind of go, most of you aren't doing this now, but yeah, a couple of you quickly undid your, just like, whoa, no, I like you, it's fine, I just really. But, we kind of metaphorically kind of do this and lean back and go, I don't know this Carl guy, but he seems to be talking nice about Muslims, and I know better. Well, how do you know better? Well, I watch the news. Really? So tell me the names real quickly of your 10 best Muslim friends. Just say their names real quickly, your 10 best Muslim friends. Well, I live in Baton Rouge. Really, there are no Muslims in Baton Rouge? You're busted. So we form, and we all do that to each other. I do that to groups of people. Muslims do that to us, totally. I just told you the story. When you ask Ali, what are the 5 things that come to, nothing positive. If I say Christianity, nothing positive would have come to Ali's mind. There is no point in Ali in southern Iraq, in my little story, would have said, oh, Christianity. Isn't that the religion where you give your life to following Jesus, and because of what he did on the cross, your sins are forgiven? This beautiful idea of grace. It's not by my works, but it's by God's grace that he offers you this beautiful free gift of salvation. And then what happens as a result of that is you serve orphans and widows for the rest of your life, like it says religion is in James. Isn't that what No. By the way, not only would Ali not say that, none of your neighbors would say that either. If you ask all your neighbors who aren't Christians, what do you first think of about Christianity? None of them are going to say what I just said right there. I guarantee it, not a single one. So I'm just suggesting sometimes the problem is actually in the vernacular. It's just the words that we use, not the reality behind it, not ripping on all things Christianity or all things Christendom, but just the words. Sometimes the words don't make sense anymore. If I say to you this morning, look at me. Look, I'm so gay. I feel so gay today. You'd be like, Carl, actually, by the way, my wife hates it when I do this. She's like, Carl, that's embarrassing. Yeah, but I'm embarrassing myself. I'm not embarrassing you. No, she's like, no, you're embarrassing me, believe me. So my poor wife. Right? You'd say, Carl, that word doesn't really mean happy anymore. Well, I'm going to take it back. It used to mean happy. I'm going to take that word back. No, I don't think so. I don't think you're going to take that word back to mean happy anymore. Gay now means something else, doesn't it? Right? So Christianity might mean originally what we want it to mean. They were called Christians at Antioch once. So somebody called them that. They didn't call themselves that, but somebody called them that. And then kind of that's the name that stuck. I think it probably originally stuck in a derogatory sense, like you little followers of Christ, kind of in a derogatory, negative way, but it stuck. And then it's been what we've called ourselves generally for 2,000 years. People that follow Jesus have called themselves Christian, which is part of Christianity. And then we try to make it something else, but people don't understand. What if we just talk about Jesus? What if we just lift up Jesus all the time? When anybody asks you what you believe, rather than saying I'm a Christian, just try this. Say, well, actually, I'm not. This is what I say. Actually, my religious background is Christian. My dad's a pastor. I'm an ordained pastor. I've been kind of on that program all my life. But really what I'm trying to do is follow Jesus. I'm not very good at it, but I'm trying to follow Jesus. And they kind of go, you're trying to follow Jesus? I go, yeah, I'm trying to follow Jesus. Again, I'm not doing that well. I do judge sometimes. Jesus said, Carl, don't judge. But I judge. He says, Carl, don't worry. I'm just thinking again of the Sermon on the Mount. Carl, do not worry. That's kind of a command. Well, I'm not really worrying. I'm just kind of concerned. Right? But Jesus said, don't do that. Jesus says again and again and again, and God throughout the Bible says, number one command in the whole Bible actually is do not fear. I get afraid all the time. I get nervous about what people will think about me. I say something that's kind of provocative, as I have this morning, and I kind of back up a little bit and explain it and tell a little joke and laugh, so you laugh with me and kind of go, oh, I still like that guy, even though he just went bam. I just kicked you pretty hard. It's kind of funny, though. So I'm concerned about what you think. That's fear of man. You have fear of death. You have fear of lack of possessions. Do you have fear of retirement, money not being there? But Jesus says, don't fear, but you still fear. So I'm just saying we should just be honest about it. I am a Christian in heritage and religion, and I'm actually trying to follow the way of Jesus, and I'm really not that good at it. And see what that does is that opens up the ground for Muslims and for outsiders. Let's just call them people that don't think like we do. People of other religions, people of other ethnic or political persuasions. It opens the ground for them to come in. The person you often like the least is the person that's 100% sure about everything, right? The person that you ask an answer, and before you ask a question, before you finish the question, you can see they're already formulating the answer, and right when you're done, bam, they got the answer. Do you like that person? No. So when people ask us about our faith, rather than being so quick to jump to all the conclusions and present the whole gospel, as we call it, in 3.5 minutes, maybe we ask a question back, which is what Jesus was brilliant at doing. He actually, I won't say never, but he almost never answers a question directly. The question that was asked of him, he almost never answers it directly. He either asks back a better question, or he gives an answer that they didn't ask, or he tells a story that they don't understand. Since Jesus is our example, I think we ought to think through a little bit about how we use parables. I'm going to tell you in the second half about a story when I'm on Hezbollah TV, and I think I'll tell you a story when I was the chairman of the Arab League in Baghdad as well, because I want to make examples out of the story. In a sense, this will sound weird because I know this is Muslim weekend and missions weekend. I actually don't care as much as you might think that you love Muslims. I actually care more that you would love Jesus. And of course you love Jesus. I can see it in your eyes. You smile at me whenever I say Jesus. There's like more of it when I say Muslims. It's like Jesus, Muslims, Jesus. So I know you like Jesus. But I want you to like him even more. I want you to think about Jesus as an example, not just as our God, as our Savior, but as a physical, tangible, literal example, his way, his teachings, how he did things, how he answered questions or not, how he told stories, and why did he tell stories. I want us to think of Jesus in that way. So we're just consumed with wanting to know him, consumed with wanting to love him and give everything, not just in a theological way, but a very practical, physical, tangible way to Jesus. How about if I pray? Father, I just pray that you would do that by your Spirit. I think only your Spirit can really make us love your Son. And we want to love Jesus. We want to love you. We want to follow you. We want to be like you as much as we can. However much that is, we want to be as much as we can like you. And we want to talk like you and think like you and pray like you. And we want to pray the things that you prayed. And we want to say the things that you said. And we want to say them in the way that you said them. And we want to love everybody that you created. And Jesus, you are the creator. It was by your word, your spoken word, that you created all things. And so we just ask that you would consume us, that the things that would most naturally come out of our heart, out of our mouth, would be what's in our heart, and that would be you. That things of you would come out of our mouth. We wouldn't just live our lives in a godly way. That's obviously important. But we'd also speak from our mouths, out loud, things about you that would affect our neighbors and our friends and our coworkers. And just ask that the things I've said so far today that are dumb, I'll say some more dumb things later, but let's just say up till now that you would just somehow magically help them be erased from people's minds that they're wrong. And the things that have been helpful, that have been provocative in a good way, that have provoked us to understand Muslims a little bit more or to love you more, Jesus, that those things would be like stuck in our heart and stuck in our minds. It would actually affect change. In your name I pray, Jesus. Amen. And
Amen.
I do. Can I say like 30 seconds about what I have over there, Dick? That's a real question.
Sure.
About what I have over there?
Sure. Tell him.
Okay. So real quick, I'll do this real quickly, just so you kind of know. I oversee 6 online university courses about the Middle East. You can just pick up a brochure for free. I lead a conference called Simply, what else? Jesus. And these are just little stickers. I just had these made, and I brought some down. So I don't know what you do with them. They just came in a box the day before I came here. I'm like, oh, let's take some to Baton Rouge. So like 30 of them over there. You can put them on the back of your computer or on your forehead. Or I would never put one on my car, because then when you drive like crazy, people are like, oh, there goes another one of those Christians. But you can if you want to. I have a DVD series called Loving Muslims and Sharing, and the little booklet thing there with it. And then another thing over there called Simply Jesus. It's a conference. We're doing another one this April, but this one, I started out with it in my living room, and then it just kind of grew bigger because I invited N.T. Wright, a guy named Tom Wright, and he actually came. So then more people wanted to come to my living room that I could handle. And then Philip Yancey, a friend of mine in Denver, came, and Tony Campolo, and it just kind of got bigger. And so that's all like 30 gazillion hours of me and all of us talking about Jesus. And then me and a friend, Jay Pathak, went to a bar downtown Denver. I actually Googled coolest bar in Denver. I actually Googled coolest bar in Denver. I don't know if you've ever done that before, but And this bar came up called Forest Room 5. So I went down and asked the owner, could we come down here with cameras and talk about Jesus every week? And he said, of course not. There's a bar. And I go, perfect. So is that okay? Can we do that? And he goes, no. And then I said, well, Jesus would be in a bar, probably more than a church. And then he's like, what? And anyway, next thing he said, yes. And so for 10 Monday nights in a row, we take a whole camera crew down there, and the bar is full of people. I mean, there's like 100 people in there. Most of them a few of them are our friends. Most of them just random guys with a drink in their hand going, why are we listening to a guy talk about Jesus in my bar? And so that's all on video. It's actually hilarious. I mean, I don't know if it's helpful or not, but it's funny. And then this is a book I wrote called Muslims, Christians, and Jesus, which is about Muslims and Christians and Jesus, as you might guess. That's why the clever title. So that's kind of like if you're interested in like just some Muslim stuff. Actually, the publisher just told me this is the best-selling book on Muslims in the last 5 years. So that made me feel happy and pleased about myself because I do get my self-worth by how many books I sell. Just to be clear, just in case you're wondering. And then this book is called Speaking of Jesus. You kind of see the theme. Speaking of Jesus, the art of not evangelism. So this is about how to talk about Jesus everywhere, all the time with everybody, and not even be thinking about evangelism, which in my opinion is what makes you not talk about Jesus. Because you're thinking too much about evangelism, not enough about Jesus. So that's, and all the books are just like I talk, kind of random and going all over the place and full of funny stories and silly stuff and whatever. So there you go. That's it. Okay.
Wow. Thank you, Carl.